everybody, and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friends, Charles.
Yes, we say friends today because we are joined by friend of the show, Saara El-Arifi. You know, last time we spoke to her, hi Saara, welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. We're super excited to have you return. It's been almost a year now. Last we spoke to you, it was like literally we were recording the day before the final strife was going to
Yeah. I was so fresh-faced.
But, you know, we love that interview, and we got a lot of positive feedback from it. And since then, you've been rather busy, Saara. You've become a Sunday Times best-selling author for the final strife.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. It is really strange. I think about a year ago, that we last spoke, and it was such an incredible time. And thank you so much for inviting me back on. This is literally
thank you.
one of my most fun interviews. So
well, that's awesome to hear. I mean, we had such a great time last time. It was like, we got to get her back, and we were so excited that thank you for being so quick with coming out with the battle drum. I mean, one a year after the other.
Yeah.
I know with fantasy authors these days, we can take that for granted sometimes, but you did it.
I did. I actually finished the battle drum before the first draft of it, before the final strife was out, which is great because I needed to do that in order to sow the seeds of the whole trilogy in the first book. It was really important to me to have that kind of plot laid down, so I knew that before they printed the final strife, I needed to know exactly what I needed to lie in wait, I guess, for the next book.
Well, it definitely shows up. You can tell how prepared you were, how things that were foreshadowed in the first book are showing up in the second book. We won't get into details here because of spoilers, but I will say it shows that you were ready to go. And I also want to say on our last interview, that has to be the most people that have reached out to us to say that they went out and bought the book of any interview that we've done. So yes, thank you, Saara, for giving such an insightful interview, making us look good, and thank you, listeners, for going out and buying the final strife, and you can't go wrong with picking up the battle drum next. So
thanks, guys.
Right, for those of you who didn't listen to our last episode, one, go check that out with us and Saara. But secondly, just so you know, Saara El-Arifi is the Sunday Times best-selling author of the Ending Fire Trilogy, and that's why we're here today. Book 2, The Battle Drum, releases May 23rd, so you still have some time to catch up. And she's also working on her upcoming Feybound, which we have questions about as well, of course. So, it's been a year. Walk us through kind of the process of because right when we were interviewing you, the book was about to come out, right? So I'm sure those couple weeks afterwards were crazy, where the book came out and word was coming in that, hey, how do you find out you're a Sunday Times best-selling author? How does that work?
Oh, it was a really wild day. So the first week of sales in the UK only counts for 3 days. So if you're going to make Sunday Times bestseller list, it is literally the 3 days: Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then your publisher finds out on a Tuesday morning, but there's some sort of embargo that the authors can't find out until Tuesday afternoon. So I was meeting my publisher on Tuesday morning. They had invited me to the office. My agent had COVID on my publication day, so she couldn't come, so it became like an almost a mini celebration with her on the Tuesday. And so she came into the office. And so it's a really strange feeling, like everyone around me knew, but I had no idea. And I knew that they knew, but they couldn't tell me. So I was like, did I make the list? And everyone's like, we can't say. And their poker faces were so good. I was like, okay, well, I just assumed. I was like, I didn't make the list. And that's okay, because I didn't, I'm a debut author that has written this mad book that's so ultimately anti-publishing in so many ways. It's not the traditional fantasy that you expect that somewhere like HarperCollins in the UK and Penguin in the US would actually publish. So I
Mhm.
never expected it to go big. And so I was like, okay, it's fine. I'm having a great time. I'll drink my mimosa and I'll go home. And then I got a call from my editor. She called both me and my agent and said, "You've hit the list. You are number four.
Wow.
You got
Wow.
within the top five. I was only 6 copies from number three.
So who was
Wow.
number three?
I can't even remember now. It's often contemporary. I think it definitely wasn't Richard Osman, but it's someone big contemporary.
Ah,
I've got it on my wall actually. I'll have a look later. But
6 books.
it was yeah, I was 6. So I was like, oh
Ah,
damn,
We were
damn.
we
But
so
should
you
have done
know,
a
close,
little
guys.
bit more social media work for you, Sarah, and spreading the word of our episode. I mean, that's within range of the
I
FTF
know.
bump. So,
Yeah. We could maybe sell 6 books. Yeah, that's true. But
Um, but yeah, I was so over the moon. It was just incredible, and yeah, the buzz of that really hasn't worn off. Like I think there's the thing with publishing is that there's so many things, there's so many pitfalls, there's so many moments that are really actually quite difficult and hard to get through. But honestly, every morning I wake up and I'm like, you are so successful, and like maybe I'm not as successful as some authors, and it's true. Like I'm definitely nowhere near the scale of super commercial books. Like I didn't hit the New York Times in the US, obviously. And I haven't sold huge amounts of copies, but I choose to wake up and be like, but you've sold anything, like I choose
well,
success every morning.
well,
And that's buzzing for me because it's like, yeah, wow, I did it.
significantly more than anything. You sold quite a bit, and like you're saying, you're a debut author, and we've seen
Yeah.
kind of like I'll bring up Rebecca Kwong, who we saw you
Yeah.
hanging out with. It's
Yeah.
like we've seen how she wrote the Poppy War trilogy, and of course it was
Yeah.
very successful. And then all of a sudden she's coming out with Babel, and it's #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So
Yeah.
I think you've got the momentum, and you've certainly got the time to get up to those kind of points. I'm sure it's tough to set your expectations anywhere near that, but
Yeah.
we believe in you. We
I
were
mean, where
saying
else
we
are we
didn't
gonna
afford,
go?
yeah,
Oh, you
right.
guys. I love you guys so much. Yeah, I think I am really I am so yeah, it even I'm not even setting expectations honestly for my career. I'm just like, you keep doing you, keep enjoying what you're doing, keep writing. Um, and it's just a crazy world. Like even we talk about Rebecca Kwong, like the Poppy Award wasn't a huge success. It was only in the last, I think it was like the last 4 years, that it kind
Mhm.
of blew up, which I'm so grateful because that's an incredible series.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but it is it, and that's the thing with publishing. It's just so strange because books have a life, like they live on. It's not like that first moment. And I've had the best start. I'm a Sunday Times bestseller, so yeah, I'm really lucky and I'm so grateful for it.
I mean, yeah, as you should be. It's great to see all these, like, it's interesting to see now in, like, the fantasy genre in particular, all the new voices kind of popping up, and all these new
Yeah.
kind of settings and themes and trends that are becoming super popular on social media and in the fantasy genre as well. And your books and your story kind of align with all of that in such a interesting way. I mean, you told us the incredible story last time you were here about how you were able to get published and the support that you had and just what was going on in the world at the time you were shopping the book
Yeah.
around. And it seems like you've really kind of, the timing was excellent, and you were ready. And it's great to see how authors, all their stories are different, but they all come together. And, like, you're telling your voice, you worked hard at it for years, and then you got the timing right, and then it just kind and it works out. So it
Yeah,
was really
yeah.
cool to see.
I'm glad it worked out because, well, at the same time, I'm like, but then I did have that, like you said, like the 14 years prior to that, trying to get it to
Right.
work out. So, um, yeah,
We can't
so
discredit those
it's,
14
I
years
know,
you were.
I know.
Well, yeah. I remember we were talking about the idea of overnight success, and then it's like,
Yeah,
well, it can feel that way when the final
yeah,
strife went through this very quick process, but it's like that's 14 years worth of overnights
Of chunk
exactly.
novels and this
preparation
and
to
that.
get there. Yeah.
Yeah, so true.
So as we've you become a Sunday Times bestseller. That got us through from when we recorded to like what, Tuesday. So there's still a long year left to go. We
Yeah.
saw you kind of find your presence on social media, which was super fun.
Yeah.
You saw you hanging out with some cool people. We mentioned R.F. Kuang a little bit earlier ago. But what was that like? What kind of press and tours were you doing in that year? Because it seemed like you were traveling all over the place, doing book signings
We were
and meeting
following your
people and
Instagram
speaking on
closely.
panels. Yeah, no, we were watching.
We're like,
and,
oh, she's with Rebecca Kwong and Samantha Shannon.
Rubbing shoulders with the best. It's true. I've been so lucky. I think even the last kind of 2 years, the biggest shift in, you know, well, I'm coming up to 3 years now being a full-time author, but in terms of how my life has changed is the community around me. And so when I first sold, it was the pandemic. In terms of lockdown, we were very much couldn't leave the house for like a year and a half. And so I was just sitting on my own at my desk, just like with my cats. And then I was really lucky to find kind of a London presence. So there's a few authors that live really close to me. So I found out Samantha Shannon lived nearby, and I still recount that moment where we met, and we really great friends now. We see each other all
Awesome.
the time. And Tasha Suri, who lives really close, Kate Dillon, Kat Dunn. There's so many incredible authors that live within range of meeting up twice a week or 3 times a week, or having that community of like colleagues has been really incredible. So what kind of came off the back of that was, oh, why don't we do this panel? Or people will approach us and go, oh, we know that you guys are friends. Do you want to do this? Or which has been really incredible. So we've had like sustained events going throughout the year, which has been great. It does feel, yeah, it is really mad sometimes when I think back to like 3 years into now. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just off on writing retreat with Rebecca Kwong and Samantha Shannon, and even that sentence is just wild to me. And I'm
Right.
so grateful that these authors have kind of like taken me under their wing and been like, so the publishing industry is crazy, isn't it? I'm like, yeah, it's crazy. So it's just been incredible, because actually what I've realized is, as authors, we're all just so like deer in headlights most of the time, even though we'll have a presence where we come across super confident. Most of the time we're just like screaming with anxiety. And I think that connection has been so important to me. So I guess over the last year, that has been a real big shift. And, writing in town in London, with a lot of writers in cafes, doing a lot of events, because that's the thing, it doesn't stop. Like release week was incredible. I did events, and then I flew out to New York and met my publishing team, which was incredible as well, and did a signing tour around there. And then, yeah, it just didn't stop. That's like a random festival here or a random event here, or I occasionally moderate as well, which has been really fun. Yeah, it's been a lot, but at the same time, balancing the fact that I need to write lots of books. So we mentioned Feybound earlier. So that was the first book in a new trilogy, and that was actually sold before the final strife came out.
Wow.
um
Wow.
which is a really unusual situation. I find myself in these weird situations all the time, but so essentially my editor, we were in a marketing meeting for the final strife, and my editor said, what's your next idea? And I was like, can we get the first idea out maybe? And I said to her, the final strife was very much like a, two fingers up to the traditional fantasy genre. I want the next trilogy to be my favorite elements of the fantasy genre, but turned on its head. So I've always been obsessed with elves ever since, Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Faye in particular, like Midsummer's Night's Dream was my favorite Shakespeare play growing up. And I say growing up, I wasn't some sort of child that read Shakespeare in my early 20s. It was it was one of those plays that I loved. And I remember thinking about Puck and the Fae, and how I could kind of incorporate that into an entirely new world. And so I kind of garbled that nonsense at her, and I said, I've got something to do with drum magic, and I want to do something with elves and fae, and I want it to be so diverse. And she said, I want that. I just want to buy that right now. And I said, are you joking? And this was March 2022. So this was last
Okay.
March. So it was literally a very long time ago. And then the deal was done a few months later. And then she said, I need it in 6 weeks.
Oh,
What? Does she know how books are made?
wait.
Yeah,
Six
that nervous
weeks?
laughter was literally me. So there was a certain edition that I can't talk about that came, we were really lucky that Feybound's going to have some great editions.
Hmm?
And that meant the time scale required me to finish it really
I
quickly.
see. I
I
see.
say finish it, also start it because I haven't started it.
Wow.
So what you're saying is that because of like book production, you were
Yes.
writing this book within a
Huh.
6 week time period, start to finish.
Yes. Yes.
Oh
Start
my
to finish,
gosh.
What was
Feybound was written in 6 weeks.
Wow.
Um,
what was a
Good for
typical
you.
day in your life during that 6 week period? That's
so
that's what I want
so
to know.
I would cry and then I'd cry some more. No, well, the thing is,
While you're writing, because that's the
yeah,
only way.
what is also wild was that I was editing the Battle Drum because the Battle Drum actually wasn't fully finished until its final form. I think January this year. So I was still editing that. I was doing a master's degree, which I'm still doing. So that required me to be
Ooh,
in town 2 days a week. So that's like 2 full days taken out, and then everything else was writing Feybound. So I'm actually a really fast drafter. I don't really know, I had no idea what this plot was going to be. I had no idea really the genre. All I knew that I wanted to, it was a war-torn estate. I knew that it was going to still have the feel of epic fantasy. I knew that it was going to be, all the things I loved about the Final Strife as well. Like it's so me. Yeah, I don't know. I smile because I had so much fun in the 6 weeks. I know it was
mhm.
insane, but it was also just fun.
Wow.
And I just wrote between 2 and 3,000 words a day, and
Wow.
just powered through it. And the manuscript was a hot mess. It was awful. But I sent it to my editor, to my agent. Actually, I said, "Can you read this? Because I know this needs to go over to my editor." She read it. She gave me some tips, and then I re-edited it within a couple of weeks, and then I sent that to my editor. So,
Wow.
and then I actually had a very smooth process with that. It was one structural edit and straight into line edit. So it was unlike the Final Strife, which is like, oh, it felt like forever editing that one. So yeah, it's been so that's what I've been doing for the rest of the time. Also writing book 3 in the Final Strife trilogy. So
Yeah.
Wow. That's a testament to your work ethic for sure. And also like to your publisher for like basically betting on you and your success,
yeah,
right? Like
Mhm.
they probably knew you were going to be a huge success, trying to lock you in early before you become the Sunday Times bestseller. But even still, you can't even like assume that that would ever happen. And
yeah,
so the fact that they had that strong of a faith in you to lock you in for
yeah,
another series is really telling and exciting. I can't
yeah.
believe you
It's
pulled it off.
actually incredible. It's like it is really. I'm so lucky. It's so rare to have like 6 books under contract. God, I'm gonna cry. It's so much. But yeah, so it is wild because they're also gonna interweave them. So it's like Feybound's coming out before book 3 in the Ending Fire trilogy, but we're not delaying anything. So it's like we're actually just increasing the amount of real estate I'm going to have in bookstores, which is incredible. It's really amazing, and
That's
I'm
awesome.
so grateful. And I think honestly, a lot of that, you know, fundamentally, publishing is a business, and I stand by that. People make crazy decisions, and it's all about how they can compare things and how they want to sell things. Right? That it is a business, and it's not about fundamentally whether they like their authors. But
Mhm.
I will say, particularly from the US perspective, they did not need to go in on this second trilogy. They could absolutely have bowed out. Um, I've done well, but it's not like I've, you know, earning back advances are very rare. I am not going to be earning back that advance, and that's okay. They're not expecting it to, but I think they had an opportunity to be quite cutthroat. Not even cutthroat, just be like, you know what? Actually, we won't offer you an option 3 years early. That's fair.
Right,
That's
right.
absolutely very fair. And I think a lot of that was to do with the strength of the relationship that I had with my
Sure.
editor, and that she could see that I was growing as an author as well, which is great. Like just in terms of talent, like I feel every day like I'm getting better. So um yeah, it's
Right.
been a wild year.
And you can produce as well, which I think is very valuable. Like just to have a reliable author from a publisher's perspective in your
Yeah.
pocket who's like a fresh voice, who's current with the demand for like the kinds of characters and themes in the fantasy genre too. I see it as a great partnership. So I'm glad that that's kind of both ways for you and it's working out so well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, but I want to kind of talk more about the battle drum specifically
Yeah.
because this is a trilogy, right? And you're writing the second book in the trilogy. And we had mentioned this while we were recording, right at the beginning, that you had already kind of had like a first draft ready to go when you had
Mhm.
published or sold the final strife. So I was just curious to like, as an author writing a fantasy trilogy, going into your second book, right? There's all these historical things of like the second book slump and like how to frame a trilogy and this and
Yeah.
that. And then you went from having this idea for a long time to now having to produce it. You released the final strife on your own time and now you have to produce
Yeah.
the other two. So what was the process like writing the battle drum, and did any of your writing process change from like before Sunday Times Saara El-Arifi to after Sunday Times? Like, was there any experience you transferred over into the process? Like, what was that experience like?
I suddenly became a diva. No, it's not. Not all.
Your coffee order got a lot more complicated
I
after
know. Yeah. Um,
Right.
no, absolutely. That's such a great question. And it is interesting because I had been warned about the second book syndrome, and a
Mhm.
lot of the people that I'd spoken to about this had said, try and get your book two done before book one's out, because your relationship to writing will change once other people can read your books. And
Mhm.
that was really interesting, actually. And it's true because as soon as people, we briefly touched on social media. I have a really interesting kind of relationship with social media because I spent much time over the last decade before I became an author working in marketing. So social media, I know the ins and outs of, but I also
Mhm.
have quite a distance from at the same time, um, from a personal perspective, which has been because because you get so many messages and it
Mhm.
can be so overwhelming, and a lot of those messages are editorial, and it's interesting that readers and I wish I could really go back and change everything for every reader sometimes, like you sometimes I'm like, you know what, maybe I should have done that.
Oh
But
boy.
it is, and I think that's what's so tough, because creating a product is within your own, you have a very limited collaboration. You have two editors and you, and sometimes your agent as well. And then all of a sudden you have thousands of readers who have their own opinions on what should have happened when, or
Mhm.
on your writing quality, on certain plot devices. And even when the majority is so positive, and I'm so grateful for those gorgeous comments that I get, even like, something sticking out, it's like, oh, you should have done this, and you're like, oh, maybe I should, you start to doubt your own choices, but there's nothing you
Yeah.
can do. Like the book lives now, right? There's nothing you can do.
Right.
So it was definitely interesting then, having finished the battle drum, the first draft anyway, and then kind of entering this relationship with readers. um it's just really strange because you're constantly confronted with work that you can never ever amend, but you are constantly suggested amends. um and so then you're trying to second guess them sometimes when you're writing the next manuscript.
Mhm.
And so I was really glad that I did finish the battle drum beforehand, because it just meant that I did everything that I wanted to do first.
Right.
And also I will say that I don't generally listen or read or engage with kind of the feedback, because it does just, like, you start a spiral, right? You just like, okay,
Oh
I'm the worst
yeah.
writer in the world. I can't, I
100%.
can't get out of bed,
Well,
because it's so easy to do.
Sure.
yeah, and it's
Um,
funny with those. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
no, please, you go ahead.
I was just saying it's funny with those kind of editorial reviews and stuff like that because it's a total can of worms, and one person will say, "Oh, I absolutely love the like the characters and the development," and then the next person will say the exact opposite. And how do you please all the people all the time? Like, of course you can't. I know with our podcast, we get reviews too, and I remember at one point I was seeing one person that wrote like great podcast with lightning fast pacing, and then someone right next to it was like, "Oh, they took too long to get into anything," and it's like.
Yeah, exactly. It's so subjective.
Right, right.
Right.
And I also
It's so
find,
subjective.
yeah, like it's interesting because Sarah, you and I both have this marketing background, so I'm always fascinated by it. And there's what people think they want, where it's like, oh, these two characters should end up together, or oh, it's so cheesy that they ended up together. But it's like, is that what you really want? You want me to
Yeah,
basically write Lord of the Rings 2? Like I don't think you want that. I think you want to be
yeah,
challenged a little bit, consider things you weren't expecting, like go
yeah,
new directions, and you probably don't know what you want until you read it. And that's what makes certain authors so popular, because they're able to kind of bring that new experience that people didn't know they wanted. Because if you knew what you were going to enjoy from a book, it
yeah.
just wouldn't be enjoyable. It's just impossible because you see it all coming.
Absolutely.
So it's like you got to take the good with the bad sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I am really pleased that I did then just like write the battle drum before like anything, any relationship kind of happened in terms of just like being perceived, because that can be
Mm-hmm.
hard. And I had a blast. Like writing the battle drum was the best experience I've had in writing anything ever. It
Wow.
just was so much fun. Because I made so many limitless decisions. I was like, okay, this is just create. Like some of the magic systems, that the new ones, I wasn't sure how they were going to work, and so I was just like, just create, just do whatever you want, and that was so much fun. And yeah, I had a really really great time actually, just putting the characters through hell. Um, I
You
won't
did.
spoil anything, but there's a whole section where kind of Silo goes down for a little while, and that was really really interesting because like, okay, so what do you do when the main character can't speak to the reader for a little while?
Mhm.
Um, and that was really fun to then go, huh, the only other character I have to play with here is John. And I don't know if I like
Right.
him. And actually, I then finished the series, finished that book and being like, he's one of my favorites. And
Yeah.
it's just really, it was just the most fun I've ever had writing. I
That's
just
funny.
sequestered in my room and just wrote. I think I probably wrote it in 6 weeks as well. Um,
Wow.
and it
That's a
was a
good
very
time
rough
frame.
draft. Yeah, apparently, but it is double the length of Feybound. But so I was
Mhm.
doing long hours, but it was so much fun. And yeah, I I I, I still think about it because I sat at this exact desk and just like, yeah, before I knew anything, and I had no concept of success in
Mhm.
terms of from a publishing perspective.
Right.
um and so it was just like, just doing this for me. um and yeah, I felt good about it. I knew that my writing had got better. I knew that the story had picked up. I knew certain things about the book that I wasn't sure about with the final strife. I just felt so
Mhm.
much more confident as a writer. And when my editors, and you're just waiting to see like, am I wrong? Am I totally wrong about this? Is it a good book? Is it? Is it? And then when my editor said, this is you've absolutely smashed it. And my edit notes were 1 page compared to the 17 pages I had for the first novel.
Wow.
What I knew then that this was a manuscript that I had that like the joy of it had definitely gone onto the page, and that's the main thing for me.
That's great to hear. Dylan and I had the privilege of being able to read the battle drum
Yay.
in
Mhm.
anticipation of this interview, and you can tell that it's almost like the world just kind of totally opens up because
Yeah.
the final strife kind of is framed around this contest, right? And it's X amount of days and there's X amount of contests, and the different people compete, and it's action packed and it's fun. And then book 2 comes around, it's not like, okay, well, Harry Potter has to now go to school for year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year
Yeah.
7. It's like, nope, they're done with that, and now it's just boom. It's like the whole story
Yeah.
and world just takes a huge opening
Yeah.
up, and they're not as structured anymore. And it's you're talking about the enthusiasm that you had for writing, and then just kind of the confidence that you've had from the first draft to getting your 1-page feedback, and it shows in the book, because you really are pushing this world way further than it was brought up in book 1. And we'll get into a spoiler section for book 1 in a few minutes here, because there's so much we wanted to talk about, but we don't want to spoil for anyone that hasn't read Final Strife yet. You still have some time, but but the one thing that we can say is that it's much more expansive. And I was
Yeah.
kind of curious, like, was that did you have like a specific goal for book 2? Like, I'm going to show people more of the world, I'm going to show people more of the magic system, this and that. Were there any goals like that you had going into a book 2?
So, so when I sold the trilogy, I had no idea what book 2 and 3 was going to be. Honestly, very, very honestly. I knew that I had a kind of general direction, but when it came down to sitting down and actually writing book 2, I'm not someone who plans at all, and still did not plan with a lot with book 2. I had to you had to kind of treat it as a 2-part book. You had to go, okay, so this is almost part 1 of the end, and that's how I had to approach it, because otherwise it would become a filler book. And I really just didn't want it to be a filler book. I needed so much of the story to happen in book 2 in order to prepare for book 3, rather than it just being like a filler. So I decided on the ending of the series and worked backwards. And I was like, I know exactly what's going to happen. And then I was like, okay, and I need to know exactly what's going to happen at the end of book 2. And there were certain themes that I wanted to hit. There were certain, I guess, concepts that I wanted to include when it came to stuff like the Tidewind, which we can talk about in the spoiler stuff. But other than that, I was like, you just have fun. You do you.
That's a great approach.
Yeah, and the fun that you're having definitely comes across. And I think that's such an interesting way of framing it, is as part 1 of the end, like part 1 of 2 parts of the end, rather than the middle, because the middle opens it up to all of those potential second book slump problems, but just got you out of that mindset entirely.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. Well, I know we've got about 10 minutes or so left, so I want to make sure we get into the spoiler section.
Yeah.
So, Dylan, do you want to give one of your famous spoiler warnings so we can ask more questions about the battle drum? Dylan's our spoiler warning guy on the show.
Yeah, I gotta have some job on this show. So the following section will be including spoilers for book 1, The Final Strife, but not book 2, The Battle Drum. Kind of give those folks who have read The Final Strife and are anticipating the soon release of The Battle Drum the chance to, get some sneak peeks without any true spoilers, while utilizing their great knowledge of The Final Strife. So if you haven't yet read The Final Strife, now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones and go read The Final Strife.
Well said, Dylan. So let's jump right into it now. So the Final Strife ends with this big reveal, right, of Lute and his yellow blood, and like kind of the whole what you thought this magic system was set up to do, and everything you assume from this class system is kind of busted wide open at the end of this book. Like, for picking up from the end of the Final Strife, like, how do you, like, what, for the magic system portion of it, like, was this moment kind of in your head from the beginning? Like you said, you started from the end and worked back with the trilogy. Like, this big moment, how, like, the whole book is dedicated to expanding on that. Like, how is that
Yeah.
process? Like, why did you leave us with such a teaser for a year?
Oh, it's so much fun. It's so funny as well because I get so many like coded messages of people just like leaving like yellow hearts or like can't
That's
believe you
funny.
did that to
That is
me.
funny.
Um and oh, I love twists so much. Like they're I love twists. I don't know if I can ever write a book without a twist.
Mhm.
And I have this thing where I kind of I I I have one twist that I want the reader to kind of figure out. I give the reader like something. And so with the final strife, it was, if you were thinking about it and you were considering it, you probably clocked that perhaps the education system was skewed towards embers and maybe everyone could blood work. You might have clocked that before you
Mhm.
figured that
Mm,
out.
mm.
Um, but then I always want one twist that no one sees coming.
Right.
And so that's kind of my secret formula to most things when it comes to writing the books. I always have one that I'm like, I'm seeding this throughout for someone to figure out, but then one that no one will figure out. And Luke having yellow blood was always from the beginning of even writing the first word. I was like, this guy has some secrets.
For
Right.
sure. And the readers can rest easy in that it is explained and explored and developed in the battle drum, and
Mhm.
that's kind of all I'll say about that. But
Yes.
it's interesting to see, and it's a clever way too of utilizing the magic system where it's presented in a very structured way of like, okay, there's red and there's blue and there's clear, and then you're like, okay, I got it. Red, blue,
Yep.
clear. And then like the thematics of the social hierarchy makes sense, but then you just like throw the wrecking ball of yellow in the mix, and then you have a whole second book.
Right.
It's a fascinating way of kind of, keeping readers on their toes and also kind of testing your own magic system in such a way. Did you find it challenging to introduce new systems or hold back and like present that narrowed point of view that we get through most of the final strife? What was that process like of developing all these different blood colors?
Yeah, so I think I will say when it comes to the magic system and the new magic system in the battle drum, which I won't talk about, but I will
Mm-hmm.
say that was very difficult um to pin down actually, because I had to it's so difficult when you're thinking about how, if you've read the final strife, you'll know that there's a voyage happening and they're going to the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
to then create a culture that has the elements that has a ability to do magic, but how would they have created it if they never spoke? How would they deal with it if they never actually were one? Which was really, really difficult. Like there was no trade routes, they could never speak. How do those cultures diverge?
Right.
Was really difficult because you
Mhm.
lean into the tropes of what you've already created. And I was like, okay, so there are wardens. No, there are no wardens. It was
Yeah.
really interesting, like having to challenge my own kind of constructs that I'd made
Right.
in
Mhm.
a different world. And that's where it got really fun, but it also was like you need to keep challenging yourself. And that's fundamentally like my whole aim with the trilogy, isn't it? Because it's like I'm like, oh yeah, there's this system in place where blood color means this, but actually, lol, that's not true.
Yeah.
Um, this is just a tool of power. And I think that obviously is quite parallel to a lot of things that in our world where
Mm-hmm.
everything is ultimately a tool of power. And I think um, figuring out how that differed between two worlds that were so politically different was interesting.
That's and like it sounds like that decision to challenge yourself and challenge the magic system and the story was very clear from the beginning, something that you wanted to do, and you didn't stop
Or
there though.
yellow from the beginning.
Yeah, it didn't stop there though because you
I
continued to
shouldn't keep
challenge
laughing.
yourself. We need to
Sorry.
get some yellow hearts. I like that little coding there. But you also challenged your relationships with your two main characters, Anor and
Yeah.
Shyla, which was, by the end of the final strife, they've developed this relationship, and it was a huge part of the book. And then this book kicks off. Again, expansion is the word of the day when we're talking about battle drum in a spoiler-free sense, but they start the book kind of going in separate directions. What was that decision like? Like, you just got these characters together, everyone's happy, and now you're like,
Yeah.
okay, goodbye. Like, let's
Yeah.
see what these characters can do now that they're together.
It was really difficult actually, because there is the tendency to like kind of just keep them happy, keep them together,
Mm-hmm.
keep them in one space. And ultimately, like, yeah, I've spent so long developing this relationship that you want to be on the page. But just from a plot perspective, they needed to be
Yeah.
separate.
Mm-hmm.
And what that posed quite a challenge in terms of the narrative, because you're like, well, why have I set this relationship up, right? Why did I do that if I'm just going to go, oh, you know what, they're not going to be together right now? um and so what that required me to do, actually, this was a lot of the editing process, was ensuring that there was a thread connecting them emotionally, even though they were in different spaces. So
Mm.
it was to keep that kind of anchor, because ultimately those two are the heart and soul of the book, right? There's so
Oh
much
yeah.
of their
Yeah.
relationship is, yeah, it's an anchor. And so I needed to keep tethering it back. So there's some really lovely moments where it almost feels like they're together, because they're
Mm-hmm.
either
Hmm.
imagining the other one or they're thinking about the other one. And those were really beautiful, but also like heart-wrenching, because I was like, oh, yeah, you're not actually together. But it
Right.
makes the final the last book pretty powerful. That's
Yeah,
all I'm
it'll
gonna
be
say.
interesting, yeah, to see where
No,
where you
yeah.
go with all of that. And also,
Yeah.
I'll say it does feel like one of those moments that you and Charles were talking about before, where it's like there's the thing that the readers can sometimes think they want, and right, like we are rooting for. I know I was rooting for, and I'm sure many others, like
Mm-hmm.
the happy Honor and Sila, like all right, now they're together. But it's like stories are made of conflict and these and
Yeah.
tension and you need some of it, especially in a book too. We'll see where things go in book three and the extent to which these conflicts and tensions are resolved in what way and all that kind of stuff. But I
Yeah.
think you do a great job of creating that tension and that distance while, like you're saying, you can tell how much the two care about each other because they are constantly thinking about each other in the way that, like, when you have a crush on someone or when you have, like,
Yeah.
especially just a, like, budding relationship, right? Like, they just gotten together and that should be this honeymoon phase where all you can think
Yeah.
about is the other person. And they are kind of in that phase, but they don't get to be together during it. So
Yeah.
I think
But
it's
but
very
the world
realistically
is
written.
ending.
Yeah.
Right. There's also that, but sometimes it feels like the only thing you can think about, despite all those stakes, are
Yeah.
the other person when you're in that stage. So,
Yeah.
very well written.
Oh, thank you.
The psych person in me definitely appreciated the way all that went down.
Absolutely. And, I think, fans of your work, Sarah, and even like in your own write up, these kinds of relationships are super important to the way you tell stories and why you write. So the fact that we're getting to see, for the most part, this relationship is at the center of this conflict, even if they're not necessarily physically together at the beginning of the book, is a good challenge. And I can already, you're talking about how you got edits from fans through social media on the first book. I can only imagine everyone's going to have opinions, but I think that is a good sign, because as long as they're
Yeah.
getting worked up, whether they like it or not, in my opinion, it is
Yeah.
a good sign.
Yeah.
And as much as the Final Strife and the Ending Fire series is like an adventure story, to me, it's also a great, like, relationship story, and trying to bring like a fresh new relationship into the fantasy genre can be
Yeah.
challenging sometimes. But I feel like, given that the way you market yourself in your bio, like, that's a huge component of why you write. And I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more as we, wrap up on time here. You're like, why the kind of relationship, particularly of Honor and Shyla, but throughout there's
Yeah.
lots of relationships in this book, why that's such a forefront of the series.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was always the novel was always going to be queer normative. It was something that was really important to me. Um, I did approach the world building of the Final Strife really from like an intersectional perspective, but I made the decision that gender and sexuality was going to be accepted and celebrated and just not even remarked upon in a
Yeah.
way.
Mhm.
which is really difficult to then translate when you're writing a novel into our world, because ultimately, if gender is not an issue, everyone would be they them, right? It wouldn't if gender didn't exist as a construct, there would be no presentation of gender, which is really difficult when you're trying to create a queer normative gender positive world. It's really difficult to then actually convey that.
Right.
So that was something that meant a lot to me, and that was something that I wanted to ensure was threaded throughout, because there is so much hurt and pain in this novel. It was a lot about, coming to terms with a lot of my identity, things that I'd experienced, translating that into a fantasy world, racism, colorism, just having that happiness through queer normativity was really important to keeping me sane as I wrote the book. I think I really love a particular relationship that happens in book 2, which is going to be tough. But I really loved that. And that was always planned from the beginning. That was kind of seeded throughout. And yeah, it's the story of my heart. There's so much of it is me on the page, and not from the character's perspective, because they're a hot mess, although I am a hot mess, but just from a world building perspective, it's really important to me to have that kind of queer normativity. And Hass is my girl, my trans woman. I absolutely love her. I worked really hard on creating a piece of joy, and that for me was that in the series.
Definitely create a piece of joy, but not unwilling. You don't pull your punches either, I'll say. And I won't say any more specifics on that to keep from spoiling anything in the Battle Drum. But
book 2, that it is tough. I had a reader actually come up to me the other day, and I was just joking around, and they said, what happened in book 3, but don't really tell me. And before they kind of said don't really tell me, and I was joking, I said, everyone dies. And she burst into tears, and no, she said,
oh,
wait,
no.
Scylla and Honor. I said, yeah, they die. And
you doubled down.
and she burst into tears, which was really cruel. And then I had to be like, no, they don't, or do they? I actually haven't finished yet, so I can't, And then she was like, I don't know if you're joking or not. I was like, she was like, I'm going to pretend. And then she said, it's my birthday, and I thought, oh God. So anyway, it was
made them cry on their birthday.
That's the back of the book kind of thing, Saara made me cry on my birthday from her writing, I think that's an endorsement, if anything else. Imagine making someone cry from a made up thing you wrote. That's a very powerful thing to be able to do.
I think they're going to be more tears with book 2. So
I anticipate that, and I'm curious to see what you bring us to in book 3 in about 6 weeks, right? Then we can we can start to see.
It is due in 6 weeks. So.
Oh wow, that's the magic number.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's your magic number. So we look forward to that, and we know you're very busy, and the book comes out in like 5 days at the time of this recording. I think it'll come out. This episode will come out
probably
on Monday,
a day
and I think
before.
The book comes out on Tuesday. Yeah. So
amazing.
A very busy time. So we'll let you get back to beating that drum, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we would love to have you back. We have so many questions. I feel like we've only scraped the iceberg, but thank you so much for the time that you were able to give us at the beginning of this. Yes, you like that little combine of phrase?
I love it.
Saara, thank you so much. Guys, the Battle Drum releases May 23rd. Go check it out, and check out the Final Stripe as well. And don't forget about Feybound coming out shortly. We're looking forward to everything Saara has, and who knows, like, if it's last year's any indicator, we check in next year, it's gonna be, who knows, all kinds of craziness going on in Saara's life, but we're here for it. So Saara, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I can't wait to come back.
All right, thank you guys for listening.
We're looking forward to it.
Yes, we are looking forward to it. Check out, again, Battle Drum, can't say that enough. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.